What you see is only a mirror of what you carry in your mind. When your mindset changes, everything else will change too. In this audiobook, we will explore how the mind of Christ, a way of thinking founded on faith rather than fear, can set you free from the invisible chains the world has placed upon you. We'll talk about how to transform a mentality that keeps you captive, how to let go of doubt, and how to embrace a life filled with purpose and inner strength. This journey will not be easy, but if you have the courage to change your mindset, I promise you, your entire life will change. Chapter 1. The Power of the Human Mind. You have no idea yet what you're truly capable of, and that's not due to a lack of potential, but to an excess of noise. You've lived so long with a mind programmed by others that you've forgotten you can rewrite it yourself. And without realizing it, every thought you let drift by, every belief you adopted without question, piece by piece built an invisible prison in which you move today as if it were the only reality. But listen closely. That prison has no lock. It was never really closed. The human mind is not a mirror that simply reflects what happens outside. It is an engine that creates. Everything around you, every decision you make, every relationship you nurture, every dream you postpone, begins first in your head, not outside, not in others' behavior, in you. And that means, uncomfortable as it may sound, that you are not a victim of your circumstances. If you lead a life that feels empty, limited, or aimless, it isn't because the world is that way. It's because your mind allowed it. I'll tell you straight, if you don't control your mind yourself, someone else will do it for you. And believe me, there are countless voices, systems, and influences ready to think for you, to tell you what you're worth, what you can do, and how far you may go. If you don't take the wheel, your thoughts will become the mirror of all those foreign opinions. And you will believe that to be the truth, even though it is often nothing more than a well-packaged lie. What almost no one tells you, your thinking shapes your reality. Every time you believe you can't do something, every time you think you're not enough, you program your reality. Your body follows, your energy drops, your will fades, and eventually you come to believe it's true, even though you unconsciously talked yourself into it. The mind of Christ works differently. It is not dominated by the noise of the world. It does not bow to fear. It does not doubt its worth. Christ knew who he was. He knew why he was here. And he knew that his power did not depend on whether others accepted or rejected him. He did not live reactively. He lived out of a deep, clear conviction. And that is exactly what you must learn. This isn't about copying a religious figure. It's about grasping what kind of mind he had. Calm in the storm, steadfast in rejection, clear amid chaos. Such a mind is no accident. It is trained. It is protected. It is nourished with truth and faith, not with fear and doubt. And you are capable of that too. But for that, you must be willing to look within yourself, to the places that feel uncomfortable, to where change begins. Do you remember how you were as a child? You weren't afraid to fail. You tried, you ran, you fell, you got back up. Your mind was free. You trusted. And that wasn't naivety. That was strength. Then came the warnings. Be careful, hold back, fit in, don't be loud, don't be too much. Each of those words became a brick in a wall you now call, "That's just how I am." But that's not who you are. You are more. The problem is you take your thinking for normal, even though it was taught to you from the outside. And as long as you don't question these patterns, you will live versions of yourself that don't truly reflect you. It isn't your intellect that changes your life. It's your awareness. And that only awakens when you're ready to face and question your inner truths. There are thoughts in you that you've repeated so often you no longer know if they really originate from you. I'm not good enough. This isn't for me. I'm too old. That's just life. Such sentences seem harmless, yet they're like slow poison. They don't kill immediately. They sneak in. They become habit. And before you know it, you live a life far from what's possible. You're not here to repeat yourself. You're here to grow. And that begins with a radical step. Start seeing your mind not as a prison, but as your ally. That doesn't mean suppressing every negative thought or forcing yourself to think positively. It means choosing consciously, staying alert, recognizing when you're shrinking yourself, and interrupting it. Because yes, it takes courage. Changing your thinking is uncomfortable. It challenges you. It makes you uncertain. But there is no growth without discomfort. Many would rather remain in their known misery than venture into unfamiliar light. And now listen well. If every thought is a seed, then you are the gardener. You can't control what the wind brings, but you decide what takes root. You can stop feeding the voice that makes you small. You can start nurturing a new voice, one that reminds you what you're capable of. The mind of Christ did not live in fear. He faced fear, looked it in the eye, and stood firm. And you can do the same. But you must choose. Today. Not when you feel ready. Not when everything is perfect. Now. Because when your mind becomes your ally, no external foe can stop you. And when you think in faith, fear loses its power over you. This is your beginning. Here your true freedom starts. Chapter 2. Faith as a tool of transformation. If you think faith is merely something spiritual that feels good, or something to cling to in hard times, you haven't yet understood how radical it really is. Faith is not a concept you read about in books or admire in sermons. Faith is a force, a living, shaping, burning force that makes the invisible tangible and the impossible possible. It's not there to comfort you when nothing else works. It's there to shatter your thinking, change your actions, and lead you where you could never go without it. The faith I speak of isn't nice. It's uncomfortable. It confronts you with decisions you've so far run from. It demands courage because it asks you to see things you don't yet see, to walk paths not yet built, and to follow a voice that often speaks quietly, but still calls you unmistakably. You cannot hope for change while clinging to your old mindset. Transformation begins where you're ready not only to act differently, but to see differently. And that is what faith does. It changes your perspective before anything outside has changed. While others wait for proof, for guarantees, for safety, you step forward. Not because you're naive, but because you've learned to trust your inner conviction more than the circumstances. There are people who spend their whole lives in standby mode. They believe they can only act once fear is gone, once the right moment arrives, once everything makes sense. But faith doesn't operate on those rules. Faith calls you to go first, and to trust that the ground appears under your feet as you step. And that is precisely where worldly thinking parts from the mindset of Christ. Because the world demands security, control, results. But Christ went ahead, even when no one understood him, even when all signs spoke against him. He acted not from convenience, but from certainty. And it is that certainty that will transform you if you let it. Transformation isn't a magic moment. It is the result of a decision you renew every day. The decision to give the unseen more weight than the seen. The decision to let conviction, not fear, guide you. The decision to rise where you once surrendered and to persist even when everything in you cries for retreat. You won't become new by waiting until you feel ready. You become new by making a new choice in the midst of chaos. And that choice is called faith. Faith is not a feeling. It's an attitude, an inner state not dependent on your mood or on others' opinions. When you truly believe, not only does what you hope for change, but also how you move, how you speak, how you think. You begin to act differently because you know inside that something greater carries you, even if there is no external proof. Many live in a mental prison without realizing it. They hope for change, but they don't trust. They pray for new doors, yet cling to old locks. And while they wait for a sign, years slip away. Not because they don't want to change, but because they don't believe. Faith is the difference between an idea and a step, between a dream and an action, between the life you wish for and the life you actually lead. The faith we speak of here is not passive wishing. It's active seizing. It's the inner yes you speak before you know how. It's the decision not to be defined by your doubts any longer. You will never be ready if you wait for the perfect feeling. You will never be certain if you rely only on your mind. But you will be free when you start believing with your spirit and proving it with your steps. Faith doesn't just change your direction. It changes your identity. You begin to see yourself not as the product of your past, but as the start of something completely new. You stop defining yourself by your failures and start living from your intrinsic worth. And that worth doesn't come from your performance, success, or recognition. It comes from your origin, and that lies beyond this world. When you start to believe, you will do things you never thought possible. Not because you suddenly gain more ability, but because you've stopped letting your limitations lead you. Faith will take you places logic never could. It will open doors long sealed, and it will bring people into your life who judge you not by what you were, but by what you're becoming. But you must dare. You must stop second-guessing yourself. You must learn to trust your intuition. For faith often speaks more softly than doubt, but more clearly. It doesn't always tell you what you want to hear, but it tells you what you need to grow. And that is precisely what this chapter is about. That you begin to view faith not as a pretty concept, but as your daily tool of transformation. Not only on Sundays, not only in crisis, but in every single thought you choose today. You can realign your mind. You can adjust your behavior. You can reinterpret your past, but only if you believe it's possible. Faith alone changes nothing, but faith that becomes action becomes the turning point. And that is where your new story begins. Not someday, not under ideal conditions, but right now. Chapter 3. Fear and Faith, two sides of the same coin. You must understand that fear and faith are not two separate worlds, not two camps you can optionally enter. They are two sides of the same inner movement. And that means at every single moment, you either stand on the side of fear or on the side of faith. There is no neutral ground. Even passivity is a choice. Even silence is a decision. And the truth is, if you don't consciously choose faith, fear will choose for you. Quietly, slowly, unnoticed. Most people see fear as an enemy, something to defeat or suppress. But the problem isn't fear itself. It's what it triggers in you, how you react to it, how much power you give it over your thinking. Fear can paralyze, yes, but only if you give it room. If you listen to it, yield to it, feed it with your doubts, insecurities, and past experiences you've never truly examined. What you may never have felt so clearly. Fear isn't simply there, it's nourished. By words, by thoughts, by inner images you replay as if you were compelled to. And that is where responsibility lies. Not in controlling external circumstances, but in how you respond internally when something threatens you, overwhelms you, or throws you out of your comfort zone. Faith, on the other hand, isn't a guarantee that you'll never feel afraid again. It's not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear have the final say. Faith doesn't mean you feel no uncertainty. It means you refuse to be ruled by it. It means you steer your inner course not by the weather outside, but by the inner compass you've reclaimed. The mindset of Christ demonstrates this powerfully. Christ knew fear. He knew doubt, loneliness, temptation, pressure, pain. But he chose not to act out of those states. He did not drift based on what he lacked. He stood firm in what he believed. Even when fear was palpable, physically felt, he chose to move forward. And it is in that choice that the difference lies. Walking the path of faith doesn't blind you to difficulty. It means you're willing to see it differently. Fear sees problems. Faith sees possibilities. Fear sees loss. Faith recognizes growth. Fear looks at what's missing. Faith builds on what could be, even if not visible yet. Many say they'd like to live more courageously. But courage isn't a talent you possess. It's a muscle you train. And fear is its exercise equipment. No confrontation, no growth, no risk, no trust, no faith. You cannot believe while demanding everything remains safe. Faith challenges you to release the familiar and embrace what's greater than yourself. It often feels like falling, but it's flying, just differently than you knew. You must grasp that fear is always an invitation. It doesn't knock only to scare you. It shows you where you're not yet free, where you still cling to old patterns, to thoughts that once helped you, but now hinder your growth. When you learn to see fear as a signal, not as a verdict, you begin to find spaces within your inner turmoil where trust can grow. Faith begins precisely where fear demands you stand still. It's the moment you tremble yet step forward. You don't know how it will end, but you begin anyway. Not to prove something to yourself, but because you sense you can no longer remain in your inner prison. Faith is not a proof of strength. It is a sign of maturity. And perhaps that is what you need right now. Stop looking for safe paths and start making true decisions. Stop asking how to rid yourself of fear and start asking how to grow within it. Stop hoping for a life without resistance and begin recognizing that resistance shapes you if you don't run from it. The world you live in wants you to believe fear is a warning you must obey, that you must protect yourself, shrink yourself, adapt, hide. But faith contradicts that. It says, you may grow, you may rise, you may show yourself even if your knees shake. And while fear throws you back onto yourself, faith connects you to something greater. It is that connection that carries you when everything else seems to collapse. Not your strength, not your knowledge, not your planning, but the conscious decision not to be driven by your fears. And you will see, the moment you make room for faith, fear loses weight, not because it disappears, but because it ceases to be your measure. When you learn to think in faith, speak in faith, live in faith, you will notice that much of what once held you back no longer has power over you. Not because circumstances changed, but because your inner position changed. You stand differently in life, more clearly, more firmly, more freely. The key isn't to avoid fear, but to choose faith in its presence, again and again, even when it's hard, even when you could fail, even when no one understands you. For it is in those moments you grow into who you truly are. And one day, you will look back and realize your fears didn't make you smaller, but larger. That you weren't broken, but reborn. Not because it was easy, but because you believed when fear shouted its loudest. Chapter 4. The Conditioned Mind. What has the world taught you? You weren't born thinking in fear. You didn't come into this world feeling you weren't good enough, strong enough, beautiful enough, smart enough, important enough. Those thoughts came later. They came with voices, with looks, with rules, with expectations, with systems that dictated what is right and wrong, what you may do and what you should better leave alone. And you adopted them as if they were your truth because you didn't yet know truth could be questioned. Your thinking didn't become what it is today by accident. It was shaped, polished, adjusted, not always consciously, often through repetition, through everyday messages, through the unspoken law of normality. You are trained without realizing it. And that's the danger. If you don't recognize your mind was programmed, you believe it's yourself. But it isn't you. You are not your patterns. You are not your conditioning. You are not the sum of expectations others planted in you. Yet as long as you don't see through that, you'll keep running in circles, making decisions that feel foreign, walking paths that aren't your own, living to fulfill rather than to discover. The conditioned mind works like a pair of glasses through which you see everything, yet you don't realize you're wearing them. You think the world is gray because you've forgotten your lenses are tinted. So you take limitation for reality, pressure for normality, conformity for safety. You learned how to think in order to be accepted, how to feel without disturbing, how to speak to please. And in that process, you lost more and more of yourself. The world taught you what successful is without asking what fulfillment means to you. It offered roles, the diligent one, the conformist, the logical, the realist. And every time you wanted to be different, a subtle correction followed. That's not how it's done. You were raised to value achievement over intuition, safety over truth, stability over courage. And so, step by step, you drifted from your inner knowing. But that is precisely where change begins, in the realization that you're not to blame, but you are responsible. You couldn't choose what was taught to you, but you can choose whether to carry it forward. The mind of Christ was free, not because he lived outside the world, but because he refused to be dominated by it. He asked questions where others bowed. He contradicted where others were silent. Above all, he thought independently, not reactively, not conformingly. He followed no system but an inner call clearer than any external order. If you want to adopt a free mindset, you must first be willing to question your old one, not with self-hatred, but with clarity. It's not about judging yourself, but freeing yourself. And for that you need courage, because it means letting go of what once gave you security. It means walking through uncertainty without immediately redefining yourself. It means admitting you've long thought yourself small and still taking the next step. You will see how deep the conditioning runs, in your relationships, in your work, in your self-image, in your expectations of happiness and love. And you will feel how liberating it is when you start to detach from it. Suddenly, you no longer need to be right. You no longer need to appear perfect. You don't need to please. You may simply be genuine, clear, awake, open. But don't underestimate this path. The conditioned mind will resist. It fights for its patterns. It reminds you of old beliefs, of supposed rules, of voices that say, "It's not that simple." It will make you doubt, want to retreat into the familiar, even if cramped. But precisely then you must stand firm, not in defiance but in awareness. Because every time you choose against old thinking, a new space emerges. A space where your own voice grows louder. A voice you haven't heard for so long because it was drowned out by the world, by your fears, by your past. That voice isn't loud. It isn't dominant. But it is true. And the more you listen, the stronger it becomes. It's not about destroying everything old. It's about examining everything. What truly strengthens you? What confines you? What did you adopt just because everyone else did? And what would happen if you stopped doing exactly that? A free mind isn't born overnight. It results from an inner attitude, staying curious, not cynical, not bitter, but ready to think anew, feel anew, act anew, even if it's uncomfortable. Because real freedom begins in the head, and it grows with every thought that isn't automatic but consciously chosen. You'll notice, the more you detach from external conditioning, the clearer you see yourself. And with that clarity comes dignity. Not pride, not arrogance, but a deep understanding of who you are and who you never have to be again. What the world taught you may have been useful once, but now is a different time. Now is your time, and it doesn't demand you conform, but that you awaken, that you clear your thinking, that you remember. Because you're not here to be a product of the world. You're here to question its rules and live your own truth. Chapter 5. Freedom begins in the mind. Freedom is not a place. It's not a possession, not a goal you reach when everything else is done. It's not a moment of triumph, not a state of external independence you can put on a shelf like a trophy. True freedom doesn't begin the moment you break free of external constraints. It begins much earlier, much deeper, where few are willing to look, in your mind. For you can be free outwardly, yet trapped inwardly. You can do whatever you want without anyone stopping you, and still be a prisoner of your own thoughts, enclosed in beliefs that aren't yours, in fears you never questioned, in automatisms that act like chains, even though you don't need a single key to break them. Some live in open spaces yet carry bars within. Others are locked up outwardly yet have minds clearer and more unbreakable than any wall around them. Freedom is not a gift of the world. It won't be handed to you because you were obedient, because you fit in, because you followed all the rules. On the contrary, the world often has an interest in keeping you unfree. Not out of malice, but because a free person is unpredictable, nonconformist, inconvenient. Freedom means thinking for yourself, leading yourself, refusing to be manipulated by fear. And that is dangerous to systems that prefer you quiet, doubtful, and dependent. Therefore, true freedom begins not with a step outward, but with a look inward. With the radical decision not to let old thought patterns dominate you any longer. It's the choice to disconnect from within, from what you were taught to believe, from what you were told, from what you habitually think, even though it shrinks you. As long as your mind is not free, every outward move will sooner or later pull you back into the familiar pattern. You can change cities, careers, partners, countries, but if you don't change your thinking, you'll only paint the same chains in new colors. External change only liberates when accompanied by internal clarity. It's pointless to burst through doors if you don't dare to walk through them. It's pointless to tread new paths if your mind still lingers on the old. Christ embodied this perfectly. He was free not because he avoided the world, but because he refused to be claimed by it. He lived in the world, but was not of it. His freedom wasn't that he could do whatever he pleased. It was that he was inwardly clear about what he should do, even if it cost him everything. That clarity, that inner independence, that courage for truth, that is mental freedom. And you can live it too. But you must begin observing yourself, not in a tense, controlling way, but with alert awareness. You must learn to notice when a thought drags you into an old pattern, when an impulse doesn't come from your heart but from fear, guilt, or conformity. You must be radically honest with yourself when you feel you're cutting yourself off because you want to please, because you don't want conflict, because you believe you must not be bigger, clearer, freer than others. Freedom doesn't mean you may do anything. It means you no longer deny yourself. You know your truth, and you live it. Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it makes you stand out, even when no one applauds. You'll find, the more you begin living from this inner freedom, the more everything changes. You'll become clearer about what you want. You'll become braver in saying no where you once bowed. You'll become quieter in moments you once felt you had to justify yourself. And you'll become louder where you've held back too long. Not out of defiance, not out of rebellion, but because you begin to feel yourself without fear, without mask, without role. But it takes time and patience and the will to walk through the chaos that arises when old thought structures collapse. It isn't easy to free yourself from your own inner prison, especially if you've learned to keep it tidy, decorate it, make yourself at home there. But one day the space grows too tight, not because the cell shrinks, but because you've grown. Then you cannot go back. Then you don't want to go back. Because you know, this inner vastness, this freedom, this clear thinking, that is true wealth. No external security can replace it. Freedom in the mind is the foundation for every authentic life. It means you no longer react from old wounds, but act from the present. That you no longer move at others' expectations, but from inner alignment. That you no longer try to control, but learn to trust, not blindly, but awake. And it is the place where genuine faith grows, not as theory, but as lived reality. For only when you are free inwardly can you believe without holding on, love without losing yourself, move forward without constantly looking back. And that is the goal, no longer to be a product of your circumstances, but an expression of your inner clarity. To be free doesn't mean to do everything right. It means to stop getting in your own way. Chapter 6. The Control of Thought. Who rules your mind? Within you flows every day a stream of thought so powerful that, unnoticed, they determine your decisions, your feelings, your reactions, your self-image, and ultimately your entire life. And the frightening thing is not that thoughts have power, but that most people have never learned to wield that power consciously. They allow their thinking to be governed by external circumstances, old memories, inner fears, or other people's opinions, and don't even notice that, step by step, they're handing over responsibility for their own lives. You cannot expect clarity as long as you don't know who is speaking inside your head. And no, you're not hearing voices. I'm talking about that ceaseless, often unconscious inner voice that constantly comments, judges, compares, condemns, or defends itself. The voice that tells you what's possible and what's not, that praises you or tears you down, that cheers you on or sabotages you. It is not simply you. It is the result of everything you have absorbed, believed, and never questioned over the years. There are thoughts so deeply embedded in you that you no longer recognize them. They're like background noise you've stopped noticing, but they still influence every movement within you. I'm not good enough. It'll never work. Others are better. I must not fail. These aren't just sentences. They're programs. And unless you expose them, they keep running, automatically, daily, for life. The difference between someone who grows and someone who continually blocks themselves is not talent, not knowledge, not luck, but mastery over one's own thinking. Whoever doesn't know how to manage their thoughts will always be ruled by them. That is an inner form of unfreedom that often goes unnoticed because it feels normal. But normality is not truth, and habit is not clarity. Christ showed us what it means not to be ruled by thoughts. He was surrounded by criticism, temptation, fear, rejection, yet his mind stayed clear, calm, and focused. Not because he had no thoughts, but because he wasn't at their mercy. He chose where to place his focus. He consciously decided which voices to give weight and which to let go. And that is your task. To discover who has the final word in your mind and whether you agree with it. Because you have power over your thinking, not over every thought that arises, but over what you do with it. Thoughts come, they belong to the nature of mind, but you decide whether to follow them, feed them, give them identity, or simply let them pass. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer, the chooser, the one who can decide once you become aware. The challenge isn't understanding this truth. It's living it in everyday life. The moment you're tired, under pressure, disappointed, or feeling attacked, that's when old patterns sneak back in. You may only notice later, when your mood shifts and you suddenly feel small, angry, sad, or listless. And if you're not awake, you'll believe it's just the way things are, though it's really a thought you unconsciously followed. The first step toward mastering your mind is a return to presence, awake, silent attention. Not forced thinking or constant self-monitoring, but an inner attitude. Who is speaking in me right now? Whose words am I listening to? Do I really want to believe this thought? It isn't about stopping every negative thought outright. It's about recognizing it and making a choice. Maybe you let it go. Maybe you counter it with a new truth. Maybe you just breathe and stay present without reacting immediately. That is mental leadership, and it grows stronger the more often you choose it. The more you consciously guide your thinking, the less you become a victim of your moods. You'll notice how small triggers used to knock you off course. And now you stay centered, not because you feel nothing, but because you've expanded the gap between stimulus and response. Because you take the time to decide how you want to respond instead of being carried away. You'll discover that many of your old beliefs were not only false, but unnecessary. That you spent years identifying with thoughts born from fear, conformity, or defense mechanisms, not from truth. And you'll feel how much energy is freed when you begin to let them go. You don't have to fight your thoughts. You have to learn to see through them. Then they lose their power. The goal isn't to have only positive thoughts. That's an illusion. The goal is clarity, the ability to discern which thoughts serve you and which limit you, which build you up and which keep you small. And that clarity brings not only inner peace but freedom of choice. You no longer react to everything. You breathe, you examine, you choose. And that is freedom. An awake mind is not a constant control mechanism. It is a space where you can lead yourself, where you steer your focus, shift your inner tone, and realign your perspective. And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You don't have to be perfect, but you have to be awake a little more each day. For whoever becomes free in their thinking will also become free in their life. And when you learn to take the lead in your mind, a new chapter begins. A life not ruled by inner noise but by clarity, presence, and strength. Chapter 7. Resilience. How to rise again after the fall. There comes a moment in life none of us can avoid. The moment of falling. It doesn't always arrive dramatically, loudly, or like in the movies. Sometimes it's quiet, creeping, almost unnoticed. But when it hits, everything changes. Not because the outside world has radically shifted, but because something inside us is shaken. A self-image, an expectation, trust, a sense of direction. And in that shaking, who you become is determined. The fall itself isn't the problem. It's the story you tell yourself afterward. The voice in your head asking how you could let it happen, judging you with shame, feeding you self-doubt with that quiet but toxic, "You should have known better." And here the real challenge begins. Not in getting back up, but in believing you're even allowed to. Resilience doesn't mean being untouched. It doesn't mean remaining strong when others break. It means falling and getting back up. With scars, with weakness, with questions, with pain, but also with a new perspective. Resilience is not armor. It's a choice. It's born not in theory, but in the fire. When you lie on the ground, you have more clarity about yourself than in any other state. Not because you suddenly understand everything, but because the noise has stopped. The masks fall, the roles crumble, and you confront yourself, your fear, your anger, your disappointment, but also your depth, your dignity, your quiet strength that previously had no stage. Many stay on the ground, not because they couldn't get up, but because they can't imagine that rising is worth it. They mistake pain for truth and believe what they've lost was all they ever had. But pain is not a verdict. It's a reaction. And if you learn to walk through it without making it your identity, healing begins. Christ fell, body and soul. He experienced rejection, betrayal, loss. He knew despair, loneliness, darkness. But he did not stay there. And the key wasn't that he had no fear, but that he didn't let fear have the last word. His strength lay not in invulnerability, but in his ability to look upward in the depths of pain. Resilience means remembering, even when everything in you wants to forget. There will be moments when you no longer recognize yourself, when you don't know who you were or who you want to be. These are not lost times, but transitions, times when something dies so that something else can be born. And even if you don't see it, the new is already growing beneath the surface, where your strength has never yet been needed. Resilience means not denying pain, but transforming it, making a lesson out of defeat, a direction out of setback, a call out of loss. And that cannot happen if you hurry, if you try to function again quickly to prove to others that you're okay. It only happens if you pause, if you allow yourself to feel, if you stay, not fleeing, but standing in the dirt, the chaos, the silence, until you can hear what is real. Resilience does not grow from pride, but from truth. It arises in moments of honesty with yourself, when you admit you're hurt, you're afraid, you're disappointed, and yet you choose to go on. Not out of spite, not out of duty, but because something within you lives that cannot be destroyed. The dignity of returning to yourself. It won't be grand applause that lifts you up, not others' approval, not their pity, not their explanations. It will be the moment you look into the mirror, exhausted, perhaps with tears, perhaps with anger, and say, I am still here. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I am still here. And that is enough to keep moving. Sometimes rising means finding a new rhythm, not continuing where you left off, but beginning anew with different values, a shifted perspective, a new measure. You don't have to go back to what was. You can redefine yourself, not based on what you lost, but on what you survived. And you'll notice, the more you learn to hold yourself in the fall, the less fear you have of falling again. You become freer. You become braver. Not because you're certain, but because you know you will always find yourself again. Resilience doesn't make you invulnerable. It makes you capable of standing up when everything else collapses. You don't have to come back perfect. You don't have to go back at all. Maybe it's time to let go of something you've carried for too long but never truly needed. Perhaps the fall was necessary to release what unconsciously bound you. And that's where your strength begins. Not in holding on, but in letting go. When you fall, and you will again, remember, you may be weak, you may doubt, you may grieve, but never forget that you can grow. And what looks like an end today is often just a beginning you have yet to understand. Resilience is not a destination. It is a journey, an inner muscle that grows every time you choose not to stay down. And with every step you take afterward, perhaps slower, perhaps more cautious, but more deliberate, trust grows in yourself, in life, in the process. You do not rise to keep functioning. You rise to live again, and you will see, it is not the fall that defines you, but how you choose to rise. Chapter 8. Faith and Action. The Path of the Brave. There is a notion of faith that feels comfortable, a notion that misses life entirely. It says, if you believe hard enough, everything will fall into place. If you wait long enough, the right thing will come to you. If you remain trustful, the universe will deliver. But this is only half the truth, and half-truths are dangerous. For real faith is not waiting. Real faith moves. It calls you not only to believe, but to act. And not someday, but now. Faith without action is like a seed in a drawer. It may hold potential, but it will bear no fruit. It is not enough to know what's possible. It is not enough to be convinced inwardly if your feet remain still. Faith that does nothing remains an idea, and ideas change nothing until they are put into practice. Action without faith is exhausting but empty. It takes both. It takes the courage to become concrete from your inner conviction, not because you have everything under control, but because something greater lives in you that wants to be seen. Many people fail not for lack of faith, but for lack of movement. They know deep down what they should do. They feel the urge to change, to set out, to embark. Yet they hesitate. They analyze. They negotiate with their fear. And in the end, nothing changes, not because they could not, but because they never began. Christ believed, but he also acted. He did not merely preach. He went. He did not confine his inner knowing to closed doors, but translated it into encounters, into presence, into decisions that made him vulnerable. For him, faith was not silent trust behind locked doors, but a path through the world, open, confrontational, alive. And that is what is asked of you as well. It is not enough to know that a calling lives within you. You must follow it. You must move, even if you don't understand, even if you're afraid, even if you make mistakes. The way of faith is not the way of a perfect plan. It is the way of radical readiness, an inner stance that says, I go, not because I can do it all, but because I trust that the way unfolds as I walk. Courage is not a feeling. It is a decision. And it shows not in grand gestures, but in everyday acts. In the email you send even though you doubt. In the conversation you seek though you fear rejection. In the step outside your comfort zone, though you have no guarantee. Faith is the engine, but courage is the gas pedal, and you will not advance if you don't press it. It won't always work immediately. Sometimes you will step forward and nothing will change. Sometimes you will act and there will be no response. But that is when your faith deepens, because it no longer depends on external affirmation, but on inner truth. The faith of the brave is not faith in instant results, but faith in the rightness of the path, regardless of speed. If you wait until you're ready, you'll never start. And if you start before you feel ready, you will find yourself growing into what you thought was too big for you. Courage to act is not the absence of fear, but acting in spite of fear. And that is where your dignity lies. That is where truth lies, not in victory, but in movement. Whatever calls you inside, begin. Not with a giant leap, but with one step. The world doesn't change through big words. It changes through brave deeds born of an inner yes. And you must give yourself that yes anew each day. No one else can speak it for you. No one else can force you to go. But the moment you begin will be the moment you start taking yourself seriously. Faith alone does not transform your world. But faith that moves into action creates new reality. It brings movement to blockages, light to darkness, clarity to chaos. And it doesn't make you a hero, but a person who lives what they believe. This is the path of the brave, not the flawless, not the unshakable, but those who choose to move even when it's hard, who show themselves even when they tremble, who set out even when no one cheers, who act not to be seen, but because they know that in action, the truth of their faith becomes visible. And you? You may stop waiting. You may begin. Chapter 9. The Abundance Mindset versus the Scarcity Mindset. There is a way of thinking that feels like a constant pull at your chest, a subtle feeling that there is never enough time, never enough money, never enough love, never enough opportunity. This mindset is like a narrow room in which you must always turn carefully so as not to bump into anything, clutching whatever you get because you fear it might be the last. It is the scarcity mindset, and it is so widespread that many people don't even realize they're trapped. It starts early. As children, we hear phrases like, "Life isn't a wish concert. You can't have everything. Money doesn't grow on trees. Be grateful for what you have." And so we learn to expect the minimum, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. We learn to limit before anything has even grown. We learn to dream small so we won't be disappointed. We learn to hope cautiously because grand hopes seem reserved for others. The scarcity mindset tells you to hunker down, to fight for what you deserve, to believe life is a limited pie where you must grab your slice before someone else takes it. And the longer you think this way, the more you behave accordingly. Comparing yourself, measuring yourself, mistrusting others. You take instead of receive. You cling instead of trust. And you begin to believe life will always drip out drops at a time, never pour from a well. But that is not the truth. It is a learned worldview, an internal attitude so often reinforced that it feels real. Yet reality is malleable, and it begins in the mind. When you carry within you the image that life provides for you, that opportunities grow like fields in spring, that love multiplies when shared, that ideas never run out but unfold the more room you give them, then you begin to move differently. The abundance mindset is not naive optimism. It is a deep trust that life does not work against you, but with you, if you're willing to clear out your inner clutter. It doesn't mean you get everything you want. It means you recognize you are never truly empty as long as you stay connected to your source, to your creativity, to your inner voice, to what is greater than fear. Abundance is not a state. It is a perspective. And it changes everything. When you think abundantly, you no longer react from lack. You give because you know giving creates space. You rejoice because you understand one light does not extinguish another. You share because you feel that possessions only live when they flow through you. You receive because you've stopped constantly justifying yourself. Christ lived from abundance, not because he possessed, but because he was connected. He could give without calculating. He could heal without depleting himself. He could reach out without losing himself. His inner well was clear. And as long as you don't tap into your own source, you will try to compensate from without. You will chase what you lack and miss what you already carry within. Those who live in scarcity see every other person's success as a threat. Those who live in abundance see it as confirmation. Because abundance knows good, multiplies when acknowledged, beauty deepens when observed, success expands when celebrated, and life holds far more possibilities than the eye can see. If you stop focusing on what's missing, it takes courage to think abundantly. It takes a willingness to let go of control. It takes trust not to have to clutch everything. And it takes inner work to unmask the old voices that still tell you to watch out, not to rest, that you must prove yourself before you receive. But the transformation begins the moment you decide not to repeat the old story. Abundance does not mean you never experience lack. It means you no longer wear lack as your identity. You allow yourself to grow beyond you. You recognize how often you hold yourself back, not because you have too little, but because you believe too little. And when you begin to create inner space for abundance, you'll see. It was never far away. It was just buried beneath old thoughts, fears, and conditioning. It is not a decision you make once. It is a daily choice. In conversations, in conflicts, in relationships, in how you treat yourself. Abundance means you give not out of fear, but conviction. You don't demand, but trust. You don't grab what you can get, but open to what truly belongs to you. And then your life changes. Not necessarily externally, not immediately in numbers, possessions, or status, but within you. In your attitude, your energy, your perspective. You become more generous, more open, more clear, not because you have more, but because you are more deeply connected to what carries you. That is the difference between scarcity and abundance. Not what you have, but how you think. And how you think determines how you live. Chapter 10. Breaking free from others' judgment. You have learned to see yourself through others' eyes. Early on, you were shown how you should appear, what you may say, how you must behave not to stand out, to belong, to be right. So you adapted, shrank, shaped yourself piece by piece, often without noticing, because the fear of exclusion was softer but stronger than your own voice. Not because you are weak, but because the need to belong is deeply rooted in us all. But at some point, that need becomes a burden. You realize you no longer recognize yourself in the roles you play, the words you choose, the decisions you never really made. You notice you grow quiet where you want to be loud, cautious where you should be bold, over-adapted where your soul is crying out for freedom, and you feel that the judgment of others can never be your compass if you long to break free inside. Others' judgment works subtly. It doesn't require loud words or open attacks. Sometimes a glance, a frown, a heavy silence is enough to make you waver. You ask yourself if you overdid it, if you're wrong, if you have to explain yourself. And so you filter, moderate, question yourself, not because you're convinced, but because you fear others' judgment more than your own regret. But every time you adapt when your heart wants something else, you lose a piece of your integrity. You pay for belonging with your authenticity. And one day, the price becomes too high, because others' judgment will never end. It will accompany you no matter how much you try to please, how much you adapt, how much you explain. You will never satisfy everyone, and if you try, you will lose yourself. Freedom begins the moment you let go of the need to be understood by all. It's the moment you acknowledge that not every opinion matters, that not every judgment says something about you, that many people don't see you but project their own stories, insecurities, standards, limits onto you, and that you no longer have to be the mirror for them. Christ lived outside those chains. He spoke though he was misunderstood. He acted though he was judged. He walked his path though he knew many would reject him, not out of defiance, but out of clarity, knowing the cost of denying his truth would be his soul. And that choice lies before you every day. It's not about becoming arrogant, untouchable, indifferent. It's about finding your center again, not spinning in the wind of others' opinions, not shrinking out of fear of criticism, but standing quietly and resolutely within yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. Because no matter how much you adapt, if you lose yourself in the process, no approval will ever satisfy you. The first step is observation, not just of what others say, but of what you do with it. Which voice takes over when you feel judged? Which old scripts awaken? What stories do you tell yourself when someone rejects or criticizes you? When you recognize this, you begin to reclaim your power. Because then you no longer let the outside world determine your worth. You set your own standard, and that standard must grow, not from pride, but from awareness. You may know your limits. You may speak your truth even if it's unpopular. You may make decisions others cannot understand, if you feel they are right for you. You are not a product of others' expectations. You are a being of depth, intuition, and responsibility. And you cannot shirk that responsibility if you want to live honestly. There will be moments of doubt. That's part of being human. But doubt is not proof you're wrong. Sometimes it's merely the echo of old voices still living inside you. And with every decision you make despite the doubts, every time you live your truth in the face of looks, opinions, and criticism, you become freer. Others' judgment loses its power when you stop placing it above yourself, when you recognize that no one can decide your worth but you, when you start building a ground inside that supports you, a space where you need neither justify, explain, nor prove yourself, but can simply be genuine. upright, alive. Sometimes this means losing people, but you will regain yourself, and that is the only loss you cannot afford. For you are here to be whole, not just to function, to please, or to mirror what others deem right. You are here to live, and that begins where you stop hiding. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to be rebellious. You only have to stop constantly adjusting when your heart already knows what is right. The greatest liberation lies not in resisting others, but in refusing to betray yourself. Chapter 11. Forgiveness, the key that frees your mind. Sometimes we carry something inside us that no one can see. No weight on our back, no visible pain, no obvious wound. But inside it rages. Something remains unresolved within. Something presses. Something constricts. A look that hurt us. A phrase burned into our soul. An action so unfair we still can't comprehend it. And the longer what happened works on us from within, the more our mind shuts down. Not outwardly, but inwardly. We keep functioning, yet deep inside something is blocked. Forgiveness is not a feeling, it is a decision. But before you make it, you must understand what's at stake. For as long as you do not forgive, truly forgive, you remain bound to what wounded you. Yes, you can move on. You can avoid places, cut off contact, suppress the story. But inside, you will keep returning to the same spot. Not because you are weak, but because your mind is looking for resolution and finds none as long as you hold on. We often believe that forgiveness absolves the other, that it means excusing, downplaying, or even forgetting what happened. Yet forgiveness does not mean you agree with what was done. It means you stop punishing yourself. You break free from the emotional entanglement that ties you to the act, to the offender, to the pain. And that is no small step. But it is necessary if you want to think freely again. For as long as you cling to anger, to resentment, to injustice, your mind cannot be open to new things. It will stay busy with old stories. And these stories will catch up with you again and again. They will appear in your relationships, in your mistrust, in your caution, in your inability to truly trust. The pain may be gone, but its effects remain, and you decide how long. Forgiveness is not a one-and-done act. It is a process, a letting go in stages, sometimes gentle, sometimes contradictory, sometimes brutally honest. There are days you believe you've done it, and then a moment comes that knocks you back. A word, a smell, a memory, and everything is there again. But that does not mean you have failed. It only means your heart is still at work. Your mind is not yet fully free, and that is okay. The power of forgiveness does not lie in undoing the past. Its power lies in healing your present, in giving you air, space, clarity, in widening your vision, relieving your heart, restoring your energy. You do not have to make peace with the act, but you may make peace with yourself. And that is the deeper truth behind forgiveness. It is first for you. There are hurts we suffer not only from others, but from ourselves. Decisions we regret. Paths we never took. Words we spoke though we knew better. And all of that we carry, often more heavily than anything others ever inflicted on us. Our own unforgiveness can be the sharpest sword. And if you do not learn to forgive yourself, you will continually stand in your own way. Forgiveness begins where you stop clinging to the past like an anchor that, though familiar, keeps you immobilized. Where you realize life goes on, and you may go with it, even if not everything is resolved. That you can choose to release the control you never truly had, and open yourself to the healing you never allowed while you clung to the old. Christ often spoke of forgiveness, not as a moral duty, but as mental liberation. He knew a person cannot live with a hardened heart. That bitterness clouds vision. That unforgiveness acts like a poison, not killing the other, but killing you. And he knew how hard it is, but also how healing. How quiet the moment when someone says, "I will not hold you any longer. I release you, and myself along with you." You need not have all the answers. You need not understand why it happened. You need not explain what you cannot grasp yourself. But you may choose to free your mind, not because the other deserves it, but because you deserve it. Because you are weary of being trapped in thoughts that do you no good. Because you are ready to open your heart again, even though it has been hurt. Because you no longer want to define yourself by what happened to you. To forgive is to say, "I move on. I carry it no more. I leave justice to life or to God, and choose my inner peace." Not because I forget, but because I understand that my mind can heal only when I stop burdening it with guilt, anger, or regret. Perhaps today you must make this decision for the first time. Perhaps you must repeat it tomorrow and the day after, until your grip loosens, until you breathe again, until you notice you feel lighter. Not because everything is fine, but because you have stopped holding on to everything. Forgiveness is no sign of weakness. It is the highest expression of inner maturity. It shows that you no longer define yourself by what was done to you, but by what you choose from within. And this choice is always yours, no matter how deep the wound. The key lies within you, and when you turn it, your mind will no longer be the same. It will be wider, calmer, freer, and from there you will think, speak, live, not from pain, but from the peace you have gifted yourself. Chapter 12. The Inner War. How you overcome your own fears. The toughest battle you will ever fight does not take place in the outside world. It is not triggered by conflicts with others, by events or misfortunes, but within you. Quietly, persistently, often invisibly. It is the war between the part of you that wants to grow and the part that wants to protect you. Between your courage and your doubt. Between your inner light and the shadow that holds you back. It is not a loud war, yet it exhausts you because it rages constantly, and because you often don't even realize you're in the midst of combat. Fear is not weakness. It is a reflex, an ancient protection mechanism designed to keep you safe. But what happens when the real danger is long past and the fear remains? What happens when it no longer warns you of fire, but of movement itself? When it not only wants to protect you, but paralyzes you, keeps you small, isolates you? You cannot grow as long as you treat your fear as truth, as long as you believe it has something to tell you that you dare not question. Yet the truth is, fear is often not real. It is the memory of something that was, the projection of something that might be, a voice from the past that interferes with your future, and you choose whether it guides your steps or whether you begin to disarm it. The inner war always begins where two forces collide, the call to change and the fear of the unknown. You want more depth, more clarity, more life. But at the same time, you want control, security, affirmation. And the stronger your desire for growth, the louder the fear that wants to keep you in the old. It is an inner tug of war, a back and forth, a constant weighing of what you are and what you could become. To win this war, you must stop fighting fear. You must learn to listen to it, not as truth, but as a symptom. Fear shows you where you are not yet free. It reveals where your thinking has grown narrow, where old wounds remain unhealed, where you have not yet fully accepted yourself. It is not an enemy, but it must not be the commander. You will not conquer fear with courage, but with awareness. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to move despite the fear. And that movement begins within, in recognizing your excuses, seeing through your retreat strategies, uncovering the habits that keep you small. Every person has their escape routes: work, distraction, control, withdrawal, anger. They are not wrong, but they are clues to what you still refuse to feel. The path out leads straight through. You cannot win the inner war by ignoring it. You must enter it, into the tight spaces, into the trembling, into that old self-image that says, "I can't, I'm not good enough, I will fail." And you must dismantle that image, not with slogans, not with motivation, but with truth, with a quiet inner clarity that says, "That may have been true once, but it no longer defines me." Christ himself knew fear. In Gethsemane, he wrestled with it. He trembled, he prayed, he sweated blood. And yet he went forward, not because he lacked fear, but because he chose to follow what was greater than it. The power that springs from that decision is what we need today. Not heroic pretense, but deep resolve. Not suppression, but acceptance, and then action. When you begin to name your fears, to stop masking or compensating them, and to face them openly, you do not lose yourself. You find yourself. Beneath every fear lies something true, a need, a pain, a longing. And when you learn to see it without fleeing, you become stronger because you become clearer. The inner war does not simply end, but it grows quieter the more you turn toward it, the more you recognize that you are not against yourself, that you are not torn apart, that the part of you holding you back need not be destroyed, but understood. Then reconciliation begins, not as surrender, but as integration. You bring all of yourself along, not only the brave part, but the vulnerable as well. And that makes you whole. You will notice that the path through fear changes you. You will breathe differently, speak differently, walk differently. Not because you are free of fear, but because you are no longer led by it. Your inner tone will shift, your energy, your presence. And suddenly you feel, I am no longer at war. I am in motion. And that is the first step toward freedom. For true victory is not having no fear, but not letting it stop you. Chapter 13. Positive versus negative thinking. Which dominates in you? What is possible in your life does not first depend on your talent, your environment, or even your circumstances. It begins much earlier, much quieter, much more subtly, in the way you think, in the tone you use when speaking to yourself, in the expectations you place on life, and in the conclusions you draw from your experiences. Day after day, hour after hour, your thinking shapes the lens through which you view the world. And that lens determines whether you feel freedom to act or hit unseen limits, whether you find strength or keep running into invisible walls. Positive thinking is often misunderstood as sugarcoating, as denying reality, as a sweet glaze over situations that actually need change. But that is not its purpose. True positive thinking is not an escape, but a deliberate choice in how you approach life, despite everything it has demanded of you so far. It is a mental attitude based not on naivety, but on responsibility. You do not choose what happens, but you choose how you interpret it, what you make of it, whether you let it limit or shape you. The negative thinker often believes they are being realistic. They call it caution, foresight, life experience, and indeed, many such thoughts sound reasonable, wise, even necessary. Yet if you look deeper, you often find something else at work. Fear, hurt, disappointment. The need to protect oneself by not hoping too much. You expect the worst so you won't be surprised. You keep yourself small so you won't fall again. You mute joy to lessen the blow of disappointment. And so your own mind becomes a safety zone, but also a prison. Negative thoughts do not appear out of nowhere. They grow from old stories, from imprints, from painful experiences. And because our brain is wired to spot danger more readily than opportunity, an inner imbalance easily takes hold. Too much skepticism, too little trust. And before you know it, a loop begins. Your thoughts stir emotions. Those emotions reinforce your thoughts, and soon you treat the whole cycle as truth. But it is not truth. It is a perspective. A well-worn habit of mind you can change, if you choose. And that is where responsibility begins. You need not feel shame for your negative thoughts, but you must not leave them unchallenged. You must learn to observe them, question them, interrupt them, not to wage war on them, but to refuse to let them dominate you. Positive thinking does not mean being happy all the time. It means not standing in your own way, not constantly proving to yourself why something won't work. It means ceasing to focus on your limits and beginning to take your possibilities seriously. It means saying yes inwardly, even when the proof for that yes is not yet in hand. Christ had a clear, expansive vision. He saw not only what was, but what could become. He saw people not by their mistakes, but by their potential. Where others saw sin, he saw healing. Where others saw failure, he saw a new beginning. His thinking was not diluted, but infused with hope. And that is what you may adopt. A vision that goes deeper than the surface, that senses movement even in failure. When you begin to guide your thoughts consciously, you will notice how much is possible within you. You will feel something expand, how suddenly strength returns, how inner fog clears into clarity. You will discover old phrases you have believed for years, and you will dismantle them. You will not rid yourself of the inner critic, but you will strip it of authority. You will not have to talk yourself into being hopeful, but you will experience your thinking as more natural, freer, more sustaining. Yet this does not happen overnight. It is a journey, a daily checking in, a conscious choosing, again and again. And sometimes you will slip back into old patterns. Catch yourself thinking negatively before you even notice. But that too is part of the process. For every moment you recognize, it is a moment of freedom, a window through which light enters. And with each of those windows, your inner space grows. It is not about sugarcoating reality. It is about shaping it. From what lives within you, not from what shaped you. For your mind is not static. It is malleable. And you hold the tools: attention, awareness, decision. And when you begin to use them, you will see that life does not merely react to you, but moves with you. Which dominates in you? The voice that limits, or the one that builds up? The one that frightens, or the one that encourages? The one that holds you back, or the one that shows you you are more than you ever believed? When you choose to cleanse, organize, and realign your thoughts, not only your perspective will change, but your whole life. Chapter 14. The Value of Authenticity. Being yourself without fear. You learn to adapt, not because you are weak, not because you don't know yourself, but because you were taught early on that authenticity is not always safe. You noticed some parts of you were unwelcome, too loud, too quiet, too honest, too sensitive, too strong. So you began to hide pieces of yourself, not out of malice, but out of the need to belong, to be loved, not to be excluded. Over time, this becomes a role, a version of you that works, that is accepted, that learned what to say, how to behave, what to keep silent about. You move through life like through a hall of mirrors, constantly reflecting, constantly striving to look right. And eventually you no longer know where you end, and others' expectations begin. Yet deep inside lives something you cannot suppress forever. A core, a voice, a sense of truth that keeps calling out. Perhaps softly, but unmistakably. And this inner signal shows itself in moments when you no longer feel alive. When you do things you don't want. When you laugh though you feel no joy. When you remain silent though your heart cries out. When you suddenly realize you are functioning, but not truly being. To live authentically means reclaiming yourself. It does not mean you must always speak every thought or behave defiantly. It means that what you project aligns with what you feel inside. That your inner compass works again. That you no longer play by rules you never set yourself. But authenticity has its price. It confronts you with the fear of not being enough, with the fear of disappointment, with the fear that if you truly show yourself, you might be loved less, might offend, might lose. And that fear is real, but not greater than what you stand to gain. For every time you deny yourself to win acceptance, you pay with inner division. And with each choice to hold back, the gap between what you do and who you are widens, until one day you feel you can hardly reach yourself, that you play roles that no longer fit, that you hear yourself speaking words you no longer believe, that your life is filtered through others, no longer arising from your own essence. Christ was radically authentic. He did not disguise himself to be accepted. He did not adapt his truth to maintain power. He did not remain silent when words were needed, even at great cost. And he did not perform to be seen. He simply was. And this being carried power, clarity, depth. It was uncomfortable, but genuine. Challenging, but healing. And that is what authenticity does. It disrupts the surface and heals the depths. When you begin to uncoil yourself, layer by layer, you will encounter parts you have forgotten, old longings, forbidden dreams, emotions you dared not express, and perhaps anger at how much you abandoned yourself. But within that anger lies a promise that you want to return, that you refuse to adapt until you become unrecognizable, that you will remain true to yourself even if others do not understand. You will have to learn to live with the risk that not everyone will like you, that some will leave, that some will be unsettled by your clarity. But you will also find new spaces opening, genuine conversations, relationships that sustain, encounters not based on your mask, but on your being. You will notice your inner yes growing louder, and your inner no clearer. It takes courage to be yourself, but it takes more courage to continue being someone you are not. For that exhausts you. It makes you quiet, inwardly weary, alien. It steals your joy in yourself. And that is the silent price of adaptation, that one day you no longer feel yourself. The path back to you is not linear. You will doubt. You will relapse. You will sometimes speak too much, then fall silent again. You will question yourself. But with each step, your truth grows. And you will feel you are not wrong. You may simply have been absent from yourself for too long. Authenticity does not mean you always know who you are. It means you are willing to find out, not by bending, but by showing up, piece by piece, genuinely, unfiltered. And with every step back to yourself, your life grows not necessarily easier, but truer. And in that truth lies your power. For you are not here to please, you are here to shine. And you can only do that when you stop hiding. Chapter 15. The Focused Mind. How you stop scattering yourself. Your mind is powerful, far more powerful than you may realize. Yet that power does not express itself through doing many things at once, but through clarity. What weakens you is not lack of energy. It is loss of direction. When you become scattered, when you constantly flit between ideas, worries, tasks, voices, when you follow every impulse and give everything importance, you lose not only time, but yourself. And what you then seek is no longer focus, but a way back. We live in a world that rewards distraction. Speed is celebrated, busyness equated with success. You receive praise for juggling many things at once, for being always available, for reacting, for moving. And you forget that movement is not always progress. You can exhaust yourself from dawn till dusk and still feel you have accomplished nothing. Not because you did nothing, but because you were everywhere except within yourself. A focused mind is not an over-disciplined control room. It is a quiet, clear space in which you consciously choose where to place your attention. For attention is your most valuable currency. Where you lavish it, your energy flows. And where your energy flows, something grows. The problem is that if you do not protect your attention, everything will claim it. From others, from worries, from old thoughts, from noise. And eventually you find yourself restless, overstimulated, tired, not physically, but mentally. Focus does not begin with to-do lists. It begins with a decision. What truly matters to me? Not externally, but internally. What do I want to nurture? What deserves my depth? Where does real life arise for me? Not distraction, not diversion, but connection. If you do not know this, you will always be distracted by trivialities. You will take every sound seriously, every message, every expectation, every opinion, and your mind will drift like a leaf in the wind, moved, but never arrived. Christ lived with clear focus. He did not let himself be hurried. He was not everywhere at once. He was where he was needed, but not because he reacted to everything, but because he acted from inner alignment. He knew who he was, what his mission was, what did not belong to him. And out of that clarity arose his presence, his power, his peace. Exactly that is possible in you as well. You must learn to say no, not only to others, but to yourself, to your inner urge to touch everything at once, to your fear of missing out, to the reflex to respond immediately. Focus needs boundaries, and boundaries are not restrictions, but protection. If you do not protect yourself, you will remain scattered, even if you work hard, even if you have goals. Without clarity, every goal is just another noise in a crowded room. Begin by opening your day deliberately, not with what you must do, but with the question, where do I really want to place my energy today? You will see, it is rarely 10 things. It is 2, perhaps 3. And if you give these things your full attention, something shifts. You work more deeply, speak more clearly, think more sharply, not because you do more, but because you are fully present. A focused mind is not a perfect mind. It is alert. It notices when it wanders. It returns without judgment. It observes what happens, but chooses what to dwell on. That is not a state you reach once. It is a practice, every day. And some days you will still get scattered, but you will notice it. And you will return, faster each time, more mindfully. That is focus. When you begin to focus your mind, you will feel your life ordering itself, not necessarily outwardly, but inwardly. You will stop comparing yourself. You will recognize that not everything is equally important, that you need not respond to every invitation, that you do not need every piece of information. You will begin to grow quieter, not because you want nothing, but because you know clearly what you want. And the more you live with that clarity, the more your environment begins to shift. You attract different conversations, different people, different opportunities. Not because you become more, but because you become more present. And presence is magnetic. It needs no volume. It needs no show. It simply is. And it arises only where a person chooses to gather their energy, not scatter it. You can begin today, not with a grand plan, but with a small cut. Put your phone away when you speak. Finish what you start. Breathe before you reply. Listen without interrupting. Do less, but do it fully. And you will see how much power lies in a single clear moment. A focused mind is no accident. It is a gift you give yourself. And the more often you give it, the more your life becomes what you truly intended. Chapter 16. Humility as Inner Strength. True humility has nothing to do with self-degradation. It isn't a quiet game of hiding, nor a strategy to reap recognition through modesty. Genuine humility is a choice, a conscious inner attitude born not of weakness, but of maturity. You don't become humble because you feel small. You become humble because you've understood that your true greatness doesn't depend on being seen or admired. A person who carries humility within them enters a room with nothing to prove. They need no praise to move forward, no stage to feel their worth. They appear quiet, yet powerful, precisely because they don't have to be loud. Their strength lies in the ability to listen, to learn, to pause, and to question themselves without losing dignity. Whoever masters this has reached a depth that cannot be seen, but can certainly be felt. Humility begins where you stop placing yourself above others, but also where you no longer sell yourself short. It isn't a sacrifice, but a calm knowing of your place in life, what you already know, and what you still have to learn. Humility lets you grow precisely because it allows you to be imperfect. It doesn't make you weak, but ready. Ready to correct yourself, ready to listen, ready to admit mistakes, and not be crushed by them. In a world that celebrates performance, humility is often overlooked. We're shaped by competition, by constant self-promotion, by the illusion that you only count if you're better than someone else. Yet in that posture lies deep exhaustion. Whoever must always shine has no rest. Whoever constantly measures themselves loses sight of what really matters. And whoever puts themselves at the center often misses what truly sustains: relationship, depth, connection. Humility creates space for others. And by giving that space, you yourself grow. You begin to judge people not by what they represent, but by what lives within them. You listen without already forming the answer. You begin to see what you previously overlooked, not because you were blind, but because you were too busy with yourself. Humility opens your eyes to the whole, and that changes everything. Jesus himself, the most powerful example of courage and clarity, lived in humility. Not because he was weak, but because he was stronger than the need to elevate himself. He knelt to wash his disciples' feet. He set no conditions on his love. He listened, and he spoke with an authority that came not from pride, but from depth. When you begin to understand humility this way, you'll see how freeing it is, because you no longer have to maintain what isn't true. A humble spirit is not indifferent. On the contrary, it's more awake than any pride, because it feels what is real. It doesn't have to defend itself. It doesn't need exaggeration. It needs no role to have value. And that's why its voice is often the most powerful in the room. Not because it's loud, but because it's authentic. If you want to tidy up your inner world, start with this question: where do I fight to be right? Where do I build walls because I'm afraid of appearing small? Where do I cling to images that make me seem strong, but keep me trapped inside? Humility means being willing to let go of those images, and that takes courage. But beyond it lies freedom, and a depth you can't force. only receive. True humility also shows itself in failure, not through self-blame, but through the ability to take responsibility without condemning yourself. You can fall. That's human. But if you can rise, look yourself in the eye and say, I have learned, then you've grown. Not in perfection, but in humanity. Humility is the soil in which every genuine change grows. Without it, everything remains facade. You can be smart, successful, charismatic, but without humility, you'll eventually become trapped in your own performance. You'll say things that no longer fit you. You'll play roles that exhaust you. And you'll lose people because you no longer truly meet them, but only present a mask. A life of humility is a life with an open heart. You no longer need defenses. No, I am better. No, I am always right. Instead, a quiet but deep peace grows within you. And with that peace comes a strength that has nothing to do with volume, but with truth. And in that truth lies an authority no title can ever give you. If you want to take a step today, start small. Take a moment to consciously step back in a conversation, in an argument, in a judgment. Don't ask, how do I come across? But, what is real right now? Then listen, look, be open. You'll be surprised at what reveals itself when you no longer have to prove who you are. Humility as inner strength isn't a goal you achieve and then keep. It's a journey, a daily one. Sometimes painful, because it confronts you with your limits, but also healing, because it leads you into a depth where you no longer have to fight. There, true life begins. Chapter 17. The power of your environment. Who speaks in your head? You believe you make your decisions alone. You believe you think what you think because you want to, because it's yours. But if you pause, truly pause, and begin to distinguish the voices in your head, you may be startled. Many of those voices aren't yours. They sound like you. They seem logical. They give you advice, but they come from outside, from people you surround yourself with, from voices you've opened up to, knowingly or not. Your environment isn't neutral. It shapes you, silently and steadily, day by day. It affects you not only with words, but with energy, with looks, with expectations, with unspoken rules. And if you're not aware of who you're letting into your inner world, you'll eventually lose track of where your truth ends and someone else's begins. A person living in a room full of doubt will begin to doubt themselves, not because they're less capable, but because they're constantly made to feel they can't. And a person in an atmosphere of fear will become cautious, quiet, invisible, even if they're truly brave. You won't become who you are. You'll become what lives around you if you're not awake. That's why it's not superficial to ask yourself whom you spend your time with. It's not arrogance to distance yourself from those who diminish you. It's self-respect. You don't have to judge anyone, but you may look closely. Who brings you life? Who lets you breathe, think, grow? And who pulls you into a web of insecurity, envy, or negativity that slowly wears you down? Not everyone who smiles means well. Not everyone close to you brings light. Sometimes it's habit that binds you, not love. You stay because you always have. You talk because you feel obligated. You listen even when you're not receiving anything. And meanwhile, you lose touch with yourself. Human beings resonate with their surroundings. We vibrate with what's around us. You can have the strongest mind, but if you immerse yourself daily in an environment that drags you down, you'll grow heavier, slower, cloudier. And that's why it's an act of inner responsibility to ask yourself again and again, who speaks in my head when I'm alone? Which phrases keep replaying? Who put them there? And do I want them to stay? You'll never be completely independent of others, and that's not the goal. We need relationships. We need encounters. But you get to choose. You can decide what energy you want to live in. You can set priorities not only at work, but in your relationships. And you can create an environment that lifts you up. Not because it always affirms you, but because it truly sees you. Sometimes that means letting go, not out of anger, but out of clarity. You start explaining less, fighting less. You withdraw not from fear, but because you've learned to protect your energy. And you open up where you can truly be yourself, not where you must justify yourself. It's an illusion to think you can stay strong if you constantly expose yourself to those who weaken you. No one is invulnerable. And the longer you stay in a destructive environment, the more you become a stranger to yourself, until you forget what freedom felt like, when you still believed in yourself. A powerful environment needs no perfection. It needs honesty, warmth, respect. It doesn't require everyone to think alike, but that differences can be held. There you can make mistakes without judgment. There you can grow without apology. And there your light won't be seen as a threat, but as inspiration. When you experience that, you'll notice something shifts inside you. Your nervous system calms. Your thoughts clear. Your decisions become bolder, not because the world changed, but because you stopped wrestling against it. You're no longer in a constant state of alarm. You're back with yourself. It may hurt to realize that some people you love aren't good for you, but even more painful is losing yourself because you bent too far in loyalty. True loyalty starts within. You can't be truly loyal to anyone if you betray yourself. That's why choosing your environment isn't a luxury. It's survival skill. It's soul hygiene. And sometimes it's silent rebellion against a world that prefers you compliant rather than alive. You can raise your voice when you're diminished. You can walk away quietly when your voice isn't heard. And you can choose anew, not out of spite, but out of awareness. Maybe it's time to reorder your inner space. Not with force, but with resolve. Who's allowed in? Who stays out? Who brings clarity? Who drains you? And who reminds you of who you really are when you've forgotten? You are the result of the voices you listen to, and you are the guardian of your inner peace. The clearer you understand that, the quieter the false voices become, and the stronger your own voice grows. Chapter 18. The Spirit of Christ in Times of Crisis. When everything around you begins to shake, when the foundations you built crack, when security dissolves and tomorrow can't be planned, your strength isn't tested, but your spirit. Not your intellect, not your knowledge, not your external status, but the substance of your inner self. And there the crucial question arises. From which spirit do you live? Whose thoughts do you allow yourself to think when the world corners you? The Spirit of Christ isn't a theological concept. It isn't a church construct or moral standard. It's an inner state, a perspective, an attitude toward the world, toward pain, and toward yourself. Above all, a source of peace in the midst of the storm. Christ did not live in fear. He faced it. He neither fled from it nor let it rule him. He saw evil, but didn't become part of it. And when everything spoke against him, the voices of the powerful, the rejection of the masses, even his friends' silence, he remained clear in spirit, alert and connected. Not because he was superhuman, but because he was deeply rooted in a consciousness that transcended visible circumstances. In times of crisis, the voice of ego grows louder. It demands control, demands to be right, demands to find someone to blame. It wants to act. From fear, from uncertainty, from internal pressure. And that's where the break happens. For what is born of fear brings no truth. It brings action, yes, but without direction. Movement, yes, but without ground. The Spirit of Christ is the opposite. It isn't passive, but it isn't driven. It isn't weak, but it isn't aggressive. It responds, not reflexively, but from inner clarity. And that clarity is priceless, especially when you risk losing yourself. In crises, many seek quick solutions, reassurance, external signs that everything will be okay. Yet whoever carries the Spirit of Christ within doesn't first look outward. They go inward. They face fear, but don't let it dictate. They see chaos, but don't lose sight of what's essential. And above all, they stay connected to the source that doesn't tremble when the earth quakes. Christian spirit doesn't mean reciting pious sayings. It means thinking differently. Not pointing fingers, but serving. Not panicking, but acting with compassion. Not defending your rights, but doing what's right, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it costs you. Jesus never promised life without storms. On the contrary, he spoke of persecution, of rejection, of inner struggle. But he promised something else, that we aren't alone, that another spirit can dwell in us, one that comforts, that reminds, that guides. And this spirit has nothing to do with escapism. On the contrary, it enables you to stand in the fire without being consumed. When you begin to connect with this spirit, something inside you shifts. Your words change. Your outlook on others changes. Your priorities change. You start seeing things that were hidden, not because they're new, but because your eyes are cleansed of the fog of fear and pride. In crisis, people tend to isolate themselves or join the crowd. Both are understandable but dangerous. One loses themselves in loneliness, the other in the clamor of the masses. The Spirit of Christ offers a third way, the way of quiet connection, of gentle authority, of serving without giving yourself away, of compassion without losing yourself. That doesn't mean you don't feel. On the contrary, you may feel more deeply than ever, pain, loss, disappointment. But you won't be overwhelmed. You won't run away. You will stand your ground, not rigidly, but rooted, not out of spite, but out of trust. This spirit also changes your relationship to power. You no longer need it to feel secure. You no longer need control to feel valuable. You no longer need a stage to be seen, because you know you are already held, loved, guided, not by people but by something deeper, something no crisis can destroy. And from that grows your strength, not the explosive, combative kind, but the quiet, steadfast, unshakable kind. The strength that doesn't shout, but endures. The strength that doesn't shine, but sustains. The strength that remains, even when others leave. If you're in a crisis, remember, you have a choice in which spirit you breathe. You can decide from what consciousness you think, speak, and act. You don't have to join the chaos. You don't have to play along. You may become still, listen, remember, and then respond differently than the world expects. The Spirit of Christ doesn't live in concepts. It lives in you if you let it. It needs no perfect circumstances, no church building, no performance, only an open heart, a conscious decision, and the willingness to remain light in the darkest times. Chapter 19. The Power of Gratitude. Gratitude isn't a superficial smile you paint on your face to mask pain. It isn't a polite phrase, a spiritual accessory you hang around your neck when you have nothing else to say. True gratitude doesn't grow from comfort but from awareness. It isn't born at life's heights, but often emerges in the deepest valley, where you recognize what remains when so much is lost. Most people link gratitude to circumstance. I'm grateful when things go well. But in truth, gratitude isn't a reaction. It's a decision. It's an inner act of orientation, not toward what's missing, but toward what's there. Not toward what should have been, but toward what is, despite everything. There are moments when gratitude is easy. when you're healthy, when you're loved, when the sun shines and everything seems to flourish. But the true power of gratitude shows itself not in those times, but when you have nothing to hold on to, except the fact that you still breathe, still feel, still exist. You wake up with a weight on your chest, worries, unresolved questions, fatigue. Yet then, perhaps by a glance out the window, a bird on the railing, the warm light on your skin, you remember. You remember that even this moment is a gift. Not perfect, but real, and that you can choose how to meet it. Gratitude is a shift in perspective. Not because you're naive or sugarcoating, but because you've grasped life's fragility. That nothing is guaranteed, that everything you love is transient, and that's why it's so precious. Whoever has internalized this needs no external reason to be grateful. They find it in silence, in imperfection, in chaos. It's not about glorifying suffering or romanticizing hardship. It's about refusing to be defined by it. It's about finding something that carries you amid the storm, something that lifts you again. Sometimes it's a single thought, I'm still here, and I can shape this day. The spirit of gratitude changes how you speak, how you see others, how you treat yourself. You become gentler, not weaker, more mindful, not slower. And you start to recognize abundance even in the smallest things, not because you're blind to what's missing, but because you no longer focus on the deficit. A grateful person expects less and receives more. Not more possessions, not more control, not more acclaim, but more inner spaciousness, more peace, more authenticity. And here lies the paradox. The less you demand, the more you open yourself. And the more open you are, the more flows to you. There are people who have everything and are still empty, and there are others who seemingly have nothing, yet radiate a warmth that changes rooms. What distinguishes them isn't their bank balance or social status, but their outlook on life, their attitude, their choice to live not in lack, but in the awareness of the often invisible plenty. Gratitude heals. Not everything, but much. It can't undo wounds or erase loss, but it gives you a new relationship to them. You stop fighting against what was. You begin to hold it, not as a burden, but as part of your story. And you recognize, even in pain there was light. Even in breaking there was life. Many chase moments, hoping they'll finally feel whole. But gratitude reverses that process. It doesn't say, if I get that, I'll be happy. It says, I am now, amid what is, ready to honor life. And that very stance transforms your energy, your presence, your being. Gratitude is daily practice. It doesn't come automatically, especially not if you're conditioned by an environment that constantly demands more, that values performance over presence, that creates lack to fuel consumption. You have to counteract it. You have to look consciously. Abundance isn't always obvious. You sometimes have to look deeper. Start by resisting the urge to reach for your phone as soon as you wake up. Ask yourself, what's already here today that I can be grateful for? Maybe it's your body carrying you. The quiet before the day begins, the chance to start anew. And at night, don't end the day by listing what was missing. Instead, pause gently. What was beautiful today? What touched me, even if it was small? Gratitude also transforms your relationships. You stop correcting, controlling, judging others. You begin to truly see them. And you say thank you more often. Not because you have to, but because you feel it, because you recognize how connected you are, and how easy it is to forget what others give you if you don't consciously notice. Living in gratitude is a spiritual wealth no one can take from you. It's not dependent on weather, on politics, on the economy. It's independent. And that's why it's so powerful. You become calmer, clearer, freer, because you carry within you what others seek outside. And when life bends you again, as it inevitably will, your strength won't save you, but your gratitude. It will remind you that even in darkness, there are traces of light, that you have a choice, that you can live not despite everything, but through it. Chapter 20. The legacy you leave, living with purpose. Someday you will no longer be here, not in this body, not on this earth. And the only thing that remains is the trace you leave behind. Not your house, not your bank account, not your titles, but what you moved in others, how you loved, how you suffered without becoming bitter, how you gave without keeping score, how your mere existence made the world a bit brighter, or didn't. Many live as if there's no after, not in a spiritual sense, but in the interpersonal. They rush from day to day, driven by to-do lists, expectations, distractions. They react to life instead of shaping it consciously. And eventually, often too late, they face the question that changes everything. What will remain of me when I'm gone? A meaningful life doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins with a decision. The decision that your existence is no accident, that your words carry weight, that your time is limited, and therefore sacred, and that you don't just want to consume, but to create. Not merely function, but to leave a mark. A legacy isn't born from a single event, but from thousands of small gestures, decisions, encounters. It's how you look at someone in shame, the patience you summon when you're tired, the honesty you show yourself even when it hurts. It's what you give when no one's watching, and what you leave behind even though you could take it. Purpose isn't a philosopher's concept. You feel it when, deep down, you know. What I'm doing aligns with who I am. It honors life. It doesn't leave me empty but connected. It often demands more courage, more dedication, more clarity. But it also gives more back. An inner spaciousness that carries you when outer securities crumble. You don't have to be famous to leave a legacy. Most people who never make the history books still reside in our hearts. They changed us. They were there when we hit bottom. They believed in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves. They restored our dignity with no grand words, no applause. That is true legacy, quiet, yet lasting. When you choose to live with this attitude, your view of the everyday changes. You waste less time on what drains you. You say no more often, not out of hardness, but out of clarity. And you say yes more often, not out of obligation, but conviction. You stop endlessly justifying yourself. You start truly being present. A person who lives with purpose behaves differently, not forced, not tense, but alert. You sense, here is someone who knows what they're doing, and why. Someone who shows greatness even in small things, who doesn't hide, yet doesn't need to prove anything, who sees their wounds not as flaws, but as testimonies of lived depth. Your legacy doesn't start someday. It starts now. In this moment when you listen, come back to yourself. Ask how you want to live. It takes shape in your relationships, in how you use time, in your ability to forgive, to learn, to move on. It grows with you, or it withers. You decide. Living with purpose also means keeping the end in mind, not as a threat, but as orientation. You live differently when you know your time isn't endless. You become bolder. You become clearer. You postpone less. You love more. And you stop pretending tomorrow is guaranteed. What you give will be carried forward, often on paths you'll never see. Maybe your child will remember your hugs when they become a parent. Maybe a colleague will follow their own path because of your courage. Maybe a stranger's day will be saved by your smile, without you even knowing. We all leave a mark, whether we intend to or not. The question is, what kind? When you're gone, no one will remember your meetings, your overtime, your perfect image. But they will remember how they felt in your presence, whether you saw them, whether you were honest, whether you left something bigger than yourself. That doesn't mean you have to be flawless. On the contrary, your humanity makes your legacy believable. Your courage to show yourself, imperfect as you are. Your capacity to grow, to fail, to rise again. People aren't moved by your perfection, but by your authenticity. You may never know whom you've touched with your life. You may never see the fruits of what you've sown. But it doesn't matter, because you know you have sown. You have lived with open eyes, open heart, open spirit, and that is enough. If this audiobook has touched you, if even a single thought has stirred something within you, then every minute has been worthwhile. Thank you for listening all the way through. Thank you for having the courage to listen, to feel, to reflect, and to grow. If you want to experience more content like this, feel free to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you won't miss any new audiobooks. And if a sentence, a moment, or a chapter has especially inspired you, write it in the comments below. I read every message, and perhaps someone else needs your words exactly. Remember, change begins within you, but it doesn't end there. Keep going. We'll meet again in the next audiobook.